If you want more people to subscribe and listen to your podcast, you have to get really good at writing clear and compelling titles, episode titles that grab people by the eyeballs and grab their attention and make them have to listen. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to go over 5 books that have some absolutely killer headlines for titles and or subtitles that you can use these as a model for creating your own. You obviously don't use the same exact one, but you use the headline structure to create compelling titles that make people want to listen. Now, this is something a lot of people aren't good at because they're not copywriters. They're not people who are trained on how to write and say words that sell and compel people to make buying or listening decisions. But that's why I'm here today. I'm going to break this down, make it easy for you. This is going to be a plug and play episode where you can look at each of these headline structures from these titles and subtitles, and you can use these structures, these headline structures that are proven to work to create your episode titles so you can get more of the right people listening to and subscribing to your podcast so your podcast will grow and also make you more money. Now, if you haven't done so already, make sure you go download the free Speak Your Listener's Language PDF, where I show you a very simple way to create and craft a clear, compelling podcast brand message that will attract more of the right people to your podcast so more people will subscribe and listen. There's a link in the description, or you can just go to podgasmshow.com and grab it. So again, it can be frustrating trying to think up titles that grab people and compel them and make them want to listen to your episodes. Your episode title will either make or break the success of that episode. It doesn't matter how good the information within the episode is if nobody listens to it. You have to grab people's attention. You have to grab them by the eyeballs, and you have to draw them in, pull them in, and they have to look at that and read that title and say, I absolutely have to listen to this. That's what you want them saying to themselves. So I have 5 books here today that I'm going to use as an example that have great titles and subtitles, and I'm going to show you what they are and also how you could apply this to your podcast. And the first book I'm going to be talking about is called The Copywriter's Guide to Getting Paid. That's the title, The Copywriter's Guide to Getting Paid. You know, I could use this for my podcast. I could call it the Podcaster's Guide to Making Money or Getting Paid if I really wanted to get close to it. And you don't want to plagiarize anything. You just want to use the headline format structure and then adapt it to what you do. How to land awesome clients and earn a great living as a copywriter. So I could apply this and say how to land awesome podcast guests, or how to land awesome guests and earn a great living as a podcaster. I could use that in my business, in my podcast, if I was teaching that. Let's say you have a real estate podcast. You could say it's the real estate agent's guide to getting paid. How to land more high-paying clients and earn a fortune as a real estate agent. You could say that, or you could break that up and maybe just use one part of it. There's a lot you could do with that. So, next one. This is a really good one, by the way. This title made me have to actually read this book. It's by a guy named John Locke, and it's called How I Sold 1 Million eBooks in 5 months. So this is interesting because how I sold 1 million ebooks in 5 months. Now you think about an ebook, well, it only cost, 99 cents, $2 or $3, $5 maybe, sometimes, maybe more. But if you sell 1 million of them in 5 months, that's pretty good. So let's say for my podcast, if this were a true statement, I could use it and say how I got 1 million, or how I got 100,000 downloads, how I got 100,000 podcast downloads in 9 months. If that were true, I could use that and teach that. People do that, by the way, all the time. Or you could say, let's say, again, if you're a real estate agent, I'm just using that because it's easy. How I sold $10 million worth of real estate in 12 months. Or something of that nature. And the reason it's talking about how the person did something that is a desired outcome that the reader or listener wants. And it says they did it in a certain amount of time. So it's like, oh wow, this person got this much of what I want in this short amount of time. Well, everybody wants to know how to do that. So that's that one. Your first 1,000 copies. the step-by-step guide to marketing your book. All right. This could be, if I was using it, your first 1,000 episodes. If it was for my podcasting themed podcast for podcasters, your first 100 episodes, the step-by-step guide to marketing your podcast, or or your first 1,000 downloads, the step-by-step guide to marketing your podcast. Or it could be like for a real estate agent, your first 1,000 homes, the step-by-step guide to making money as a real estate agent. Or your step-by-step guide to making a ton of money as a real estate agent. Again, you can play with these. You want to think about, with each of these, you want to think about desired outcomes that your ideal listeners want to get. All right. Now, this is one of my personal favorites because I actually wrote this book. I co-authored it with my friend Chad Robichaux. It's called Redeployed: How Combat Veterans Can Fight the Battle Within and Win the War at Home. Now, we wrote this. We're both combat veterans from the war in Afghanistan. And so we wrote this about what helped us getting our heads back on straight after coming home from combat. And so I got injured by a suicide bomber. Vehicles blown up a couple times. A suicide bomber tried to kill me. If you know anything about my story, year and 2 months at the hospital. So I've been through that myself a lot. And so I have some credibility about putting my life back together after war. And then Chad, he did something like 10 or 12 deployments. And so he's been through it also. But the more important thing for this lesson, it's how combat veterans can fight the battle within and win the war at home. Now, this is important because, number one, we qualify who this book is for. Combat veterans. How combat veterans can what? Well, what are they trying to do or accomplish after you come home from war? Well, one of the big struggles is post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, mental health, things like that. So we say how combat veterans can what? Fight the battle within. And then what? Another second outcome, win the war at home. Now, we could have been a lot more specific with this, but there are a number of issues that our particular demographic, they all know what this means. We didn't need to be more specific. And Randy Couture also wrote the foreword, UFC guy, Hall of Fame guy, so that was pretty cool. And now for one of my absolute favorites, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. What is the subtitle? I love it. It's what the rich teach their kids about money that the poor and middle class do not. Good subtitle for a few reasons. Well, it tells you what it's about. What rich people teach their kids about money, because if they're rich, they obviously have a lot. But also, I like how it's kind of bringing kids into it, because it's basically saying, here's what rich people are teaching their kids that you're not teaching your kids. In other words, it's sort of implying their kids are going to be wealthier than your kids, and it kind of implies the kids have an unfair advantage because they have rich parents. And so what the rich teach their kids about money, and by the way, the rich, well, that's what everybody ideally would like to be if they had the option, or if they had the, if the situation, you can obviously build that yourself. But what the rich teach their kids about money that the poor and middle class do not. So it's what some people are teaching their kids about money, which is the topic of discussion, that the poor and middle class do not. Now, if I wanted to apply this to my podcast and I wanted to create an episode, maybe I will, I could say something like, what rich podcasters know about podcasting that new and beginner podcasters do not. Something of that nature. Because it makes you wonder, what do these people know that's working that I don't know? It piques your curiosity, and that's really important to do. Those are just 5 examples that you can use right now to start writing headlines, titles, using headline structures to write titles that are compelling for your podcast to get more listeners and subscribers. And by the way, if you're not a word nerd like me, if you want to work with me one-on-one, I actually do take on a few clients, very selective, few clients a month, and I rewrite all of your brand messaging for your podcast for you. It's something I love to do. I've had some great success with it. I absolutely love doing it. And so if you want me to do that, the mental heavy lifting and the writing and all that I'm good at and maybe you are not good at, send me an email at podgasmshow@gmail.com to check my availability. Just put the word consult in the subject line, And again, I don't work with everybody. I'm not a good fit for everybody. But if you'd like to check it out and see if we can work together, if we're a good fit, and I can help you grow your podcast by rebranding all the messaging for your podcast so that when the right people see it, they'll know it's for them. They'll listen to it, they'll subscribe and become faithful listeners and even help you monetize your podcast faster, shoot me an email, podgasmshow@gmail.com, and check my availability.